Hello all. Recently I've heard a number of apologists claim that atheism is a worldview, to which atheists have responded that atheism isn't. In this video I want to take a more detailed look at what these claims mean and whether there's any truth to either side. To begin with, what is a worldview? The concept of a worldview comes from sociology and typically refers to a bunch of beliefs about the way the world is and how it works. In a sociological context, we can talk about a national worldview, such as the American worldview, and the kind of beliefs that it includes, like the idea of American exceptionalism. But this context is not what's meant when an apologist talks about worldviews, since Christianity or atheism hardly count as nations, or even communities. When discussing the philosophy of religion, a worldview is better understood at an individual level. That is, each person has a particular worldview, the sum total of their beliefs about the world. And some aspects of these worldviews will be shared between people and may have names or labels. For example, my worldview includes the belief that the Earth orbits the Sun, and this belief is common to many people and is called heliocentrism. I also have somewhat more idiosyncratic beliefs that are not particularly common, such as the belief that my bedside table doesn't have a lamp on it. Most people's worldviews would have no beliefs about the existence of a lamp on my bedside table. But when we're discussing something like the Christian worldview, we're clearly referring to a worldview that is common to a number of people, not just an individual. The problem with claiming that atheism is a worldview is it clearly isn't. It's a number of worldviews. There is no single atheistic worldview, so to talk about an atheist worldview is clearly false. But the same can be said of Christianity. There is no single Christian worldview, and for almost any belief that some Christian has, it's possible to find some other Christian who disagrees. About the only thing that all Christians can agree on is that Jesus was the Son of God. So on that basis, neither Christianity nor atheism are worldviews. So, is there some other sense in which it is meaningful to talk about a Christian worldview? Well, despite there being huge variation in the beliefs of Christians, we could start by limiting our consideration to a smaller subset of Christians. For example, we may consider US Christians who adhere to popular denominations. This subset of Christians may well have more beliefs in common, and the set of beliefs that they share may be called the Christian worldview if this is the context that we're talking about. We would have to keep in mind the context in which we're having the discussion, but within that context, it would make sense to talk about a Christian worldview. Well, what about the idea of an atheist worldview? Well, by a similar process, we could consider a relevant subset of all atheists and talk about the most common shared beliefs. For example, if we're having a discussion about atheists on YouTube, then most YouTube atheists have shared beliefs in things like the efficacy of science, philosophical naturalism, and the value of secularism. So to lump these ideas together as the atheist worldview may be valid from a purely sociological perspective. But many atheists would object to this, since none of these views follow necessarily from their atheism. That is, it's like finding that most Sagittarians believe in ghosts and calling the belief in ghosts part of the Sagittarian worldview. It's probably okay in a sociological context, but not in a philosophical one. So is there a sense in which an atheist worldview is meaningful in a philosophical sense? The crux of the objection is the claim that we may only define worldviews as sets of beliefs that have a logical connection. So in that sense, since most Christians derive a group of beliefs from Jesus' divinity, it makes sense to group them together as a Christian worldview. But by the same token, many atheists have a number of beliefs that are interconnected with their atheism. Very few atheists disbelieve in God, but believe in theocracy. So in this sense, if we find that many atheists have a cluster of beliefs that logically fit together, say empiricism, atheism, philosophical naturalism, and secularism, then it seems appropriate to consider these beliefs as part of a worldview. The only objection left is what to label this worldview. Since atheism is not the root cause of these other beliefs in most atheists, it would perhaps be more appropriate to label it the scientific worldview, or the evidentiary rationalist worldview, or something like that. But most of the people who subscribe to this worldview would probably identify with the label of atheist ahead of many of those other labels. And on that basis, it seems reasonable to me to call it the atheist worldview. So to me, it's okay to call it the atheist worldview if what we mean is that this is the set of beliefs that someone who identifies as an atheist will typically hold. And in essence, this is what we mean when we talk about a Christian worldview too. That this is the set of beliefs that someone who identifies as a Christian will typically hold. This does not mean that every atheist will subscribe to the stereotypical atheist worldview, or that you must believe in these things to join the atheist club, but simply that these beliefs tend to go with atheism. A few concluding remarks. I'm not saying that these other beliefs amount to atheist dogma, or that if you don't have them, then you're doing atheism wrong. That's the no true Scotsman fallacy. I'm saying that many atheists came to their atheism for similar reasons, and hence have similar philosophical views, but that the label atheist does strictly mean simply someone who lacks a belief in gods. I'm also not saying that Christian apologists are right. They aren't. The apologist argument is that all worldviews are equal, and that the atheist worldview is simply a different set of dogmas. This is patently false, and no amount of calling these views the atheist worldview will make it true. And atheists who respond to these apologists by saying that there is no atheist worldview are correct. In the sense that the apologist is using the term worldview, atheism doesn't count. And so their objections are quite right, and I agree with them. What I'm arguing for in this video is that there's a broader context in which atheism could be said to be a worldview, but this lends no support to the apologist's arguments. Finally, if you want to argue that the commonalities that I think atheists share don't actually exist, then I'm willing to listen. I think I've observed a broad pattern of shared beliefs amongst atheists, but I concede that this is only true within fairly small groupings. Such commonalities probably don't exist at a larger level, similar to how the agreement between Christians disappears when you consider a more global context. If it's shown that even on a fairly small level, atheists have little in common except a lack of belief in God, then I'd agree that an atheist worldview doesn't exist. Also, if you'd rather not use the term atheist worldview, but rather secular humanist worldview or similar, then we probably agree on everything except the label, and I'm not dogmatically attached to it. Anyway, that's my thinking on why it can be okay to talk about the atheist worldview in some contexts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.